Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. A few folks are still coming in, but we'll get started with introductions. My name is Lynn Stoddard. I'm the Executive Director of Sustainable CT, and we're delighted to co-sponsor today's session on safe mobility for all and to be part of convening this entire five-part webinar series called the Sustainable Municipalities, Innovative Practices and Emerging Trends in the US. The five-part webinar series is co-convened by the Hixon Center for Urban Ecology at Yale University, Sustainable CT, and the Sustainable States Network. The Sustainable States Network is a network of statewide sustainability programs focused on making change at the local level, like Sustainable CT here in Connecticut and others that we'll be hearing from throughout the lecture series. So today we're going to hear from municipal leaders in Red Bank, New Jersey and Kingston, New York, two other states in the Sustainable States Network. Last week we heard from towns in California and Massachusetts. In the final 2 weeks we'll be hearing from municipal leaders in Connecticut, New Jersey, Minnesota and Pennsylvania. So lots of great stuff in store. Today we've got three dynamic speakers to address safe mobility for all, and we'll hear some inspiring stories from across the country. We'll have time after each speaker to answer any questions. Please type them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and I will ask the presenters to reply. So our first speaker is John Wargo, Tweedy Orde Professor of Environmental Health and Political Science at Yale School of Environment. John Wargo's research explores threats to human health posed by environmental hazards, including exposures to pesticides, vehicle emissions, toxins in food, plastics, flame retardants, metals, chemicals released outdoors and indoors. His current research is examining environmental and health challenges associated with the global food system. Welcome, John. Thank you so much for sharing with us today, and it's all yours.
Thank you, Lynn. And hello, everybody, and thanks for joining us. And especially thanks to Colleen Murphy-Dunning and Anna Pickett and Anna Kosh for spending so much time pulling this webinar together. So I thought I would speak today about some research that I've done on air quality in the vein of safe and healthy cities. And the topic I've chosen has to do with respiratory illness, which is one of the most chronic types of illness in the United States. And some of the causes include poor quality air. So the specific topic that I've chosen is research having to do with diesel exhaust, which is ever prevalent in urban areas. And I've chosen to focus in on vulnerable populations, but in this case, particularly children, and a subset of those kids, those that ride school buses, wondering how they're exposed and what the implications are. And just a quick background on the science here. Diesel particles include about 4,000 different compounds, and these mixtures change all the time. But they include many very, very ultrafine particles that can get deeply embedded in the lung. And when that occurs in a healthy person, it causes irritation, it causes congestion, and perhaps some reactions such as a cough. If it happens in an asthmatic child, it's more serious because the airways are narrower to begin with. And because a child has background inflammation, they're even narrower. And the particles induce additional inflammation, and they often cannot be expelled when someone exhales. So I'm going to share my screen with you here and show you a few slides. So just to kind of give you background of a very busy New York street just outside of Penn Station, there are about 600,000 school buses in the US. And the average child rides a school bus about 2 hours per day, and this would be over 5 days a week, 20 days a month. That adds up to 40 hours per month or a total of 15 24-hour days per year. So the exposure here is quite a bit higher than most people would think intuitively. So one thing that I was anxious to do was to find out whether or not US EPA air quality monitors were accurately picking up the exposure that kids have as they move through their daily life. And the experiment that I conducted with colleagues at Yale and Stanford and also UConn included my daughter as the first guinea pig, who is seen here walking with about 5 different pieces of equipment. She's carrying a stainless steel canister that inhales air at a specified rate to allow measurement of volatile organic compounds. She's got a particle meter on her belt. She's carrying a formaldehyde pump, and I'm walking next to her with an ethylometer that measures carbon particles that are characteristic of any sort of fossil fuel combustion. So we followed children from the time they left their houses in the morning to when they came back, and we mapped out every 10 seconds the kinds of or the magnitude of particulates that they experienced. And here's an example of that map for a single child. And you see these bursts at the beginning of the day and bursts at the end of the day. And these are diesel exhaust particles inside the school bus ride. We know this because we took measurements throughout the school day, and it doesn't seem like a big blip, but the scale on the left basically gives away the punchline here, which is that the dirtiest part of their day, their 8-hour period away from home, is the ride on the bus. So we also kept a log where the students were inside the building, and then we were able to measure the gases that were associated with these particles. The red line on the bottom of this graph demarks the allowable average particulate matter limit in the United States, according to the Clean Air Act. And it's about 12 micrograms per cubic meter. And what you see in the whisker box plots above the red bar are the distributions of PM 2.5 that we measured on the school buses. On the very left, you see some relatively clean school buses, but perhaps 2/3 of the buses were way above the federal limit, 4 or 5, even 10 times, so that we noticed that there could be a health effect that might result from especially extended periods of exposure. I'll also emphasize that there are no filtration systems on these buses, no filtration systems for indoor air. The only filters they actually have are these very wide mesh screens that you could poke a pencil through, designed to keep rodents and birds from entering the passenger compartment. So, typically buses keep their engines idling, and the exhaust from the bus in front is just pushed or is blown into the bus behind. So as buses train into bus stations or schools, they are all breathing each other's exhaust. So when we understood this, and we understood the background prevalence of asthma in Connecticut schools, which is in some urban areas over 20%. And we measured that by asking school nurses whether or not the children had registered their meds with the school nurse for asthma, albuterol especially. And so that we know that we have a vulnerable population. We know that they are inherently vulnerable because of their small size. And we also know that the exposure duration is quite long. So when we realized this, we made a bunch of recommendations to the federal government, what they ought to do to reduce these exposures. And one would be to retrofit diesel buses with lower emission technologies, especially catalytic converters and particle traps. Another would be to require buses to use different kinds of fuel rather than diesel fuel that is notoriously dirty, high in sulfur. It gives off not just a high volume of particles, but also many different kinds of volatile organic gases that attach to those particles. The particles were actually kind of gummy and sticky. the gases will bind to those particles. In Connecticut, tailpipe emissions are not routinely tested by law, and there are no passenger air cabin quality standards, as in addition to the absence of any air filtration equipment. So those are all just kind of very basic, fundamental protective measures that should be taken. A federal law should also assume that indoor and outdoor exposures are occurring, and that these exposures on the bus are building on top of other exposures. And Connecticut, during dozens of days per year, is out of compliance with the Clean Air Act already. So these exposures are coming on top of that. In addition, in a lot of urban areas, you've got a special problem with other sources, and those sources could range from it being a major shipping port, say the New Jersey Port Authority, New York, New Jersey Port Authority, the Long Beach Port Authority, as another example, where trucks convene, diesel trucks convene, the ships come in, the ships keep running their diesel engines, in addition to other kinds of diesel vehicles that are commonly in urban settings. So the health threat, I think, of diesel exhaust is grossly underestimated, and many people think that the newer vehicles are a lot cleaner because they don't belch black smoke. They're actually producing more finer sized particles, so they're not visible to the naked eye. And it's these ultra fine particles, as I said earlier, can get deeply embedded into the lung. So I'll just close with a comment that when my daughter heard my conclusions about this and the significance of the exposures and health threats, I was embarrassed into having to drive her to school for the next 4 years. So with that, I think I'll end and see if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, John. So folks can put their questions by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Maybe while we're waiting for those to come in, I have one. I'm just curious about electric school buses, John, and are they actually, is the technology and the price advanced enough that those are replacing the more polluting buses anywhere in the country?
Well, the technology is there, and the problem is that the cost is about 4 times, sometimes even 5 times higher than the cost of running these older engines. And diesel engines will last for 30 and 40 years sometimes, and they're commonly rebuilt so that the expectation that you're going to set tougher standards, or that we need to switch to electric vehicles, or even new emission control technology, it's thwarted by the enormous size of the fleet that's currently using these diesel engines that have such a long lifespan. So we need to create rules that newer engines have to be purchased, that we need to switch to natural gas buses, which have a much cleaner profile, as a bridge to getting us eventually to electric vehicles.
Great. So there are a few questions in the Q&A. I think I'll lump some of them together. Question about your study being published. I think some of our Yale folks could probably post the link to that. The 7 recommendations that are on the screen, are they listed in order of importance? If you want to address that.
Sure. Let me just take a look at the screen here. Well, I think the most important thing is to try to retrofit the buses that we've got now. A brand new bus will cost well over $100,000. The electric buses, $300,000 to $400,000. So we've got to work with cleaning up the technology that we have. If we had more buses, the buses would run shorter routes, meaning children would be exposed less time. One striking finding was that in some parts of the country, especially for disabled children that are going from their home to regional schools, some are traveling 2 or 3 to even 4 hours per day one way to get to those regional schools to come back. So their exposures are much, much higher. So, I mean, if you think about it as a problem of reducing exposure, technology is one part of it, but also reducing time on the bus is another.
Great. There's some other questions on, I guess, another approach related to idling, time limits, and that kind of thing. I know Connecticut has a 3-minute. Any comment on idling requirements or a leverage point there?
Sure. One of the first things that we did was to draft a piece of Connecticut legislation that was adopted that limits bus idling, school bus idling for 3 minutes. So we were delighted that passed, but it's not enforced. Drivers often don't even know about it. So the concept is good, but you know, in an area like ours with cold winters, the bus drivers and the children want to have the buses running to keep them warm. So we've got a trade-off there that is causing them not to wish to comply with the law.
I think we'll do one last quick question, John. How many students did you have to carry out this experiment?
Yeah, we had about 25, and you could say, well, that's a really low number, which it was, but we had not very much money to pull this study off, and we were really struck by the similarity in findings from child to child. And so the Health Canada, the major health agency in Canada, replicated the study and found exactly the same issues. State of California replicated the study and found exactly the same types of exposures. And what happened then was that different state governments allocated funds to buy new buses. And also the federal government started applying some of the penalties that they had applied, the financial penalties, to major manufacturers of vehicles that got caught cheating on their vehicle emission reports or their fuel efficiency reports to EPA. And that money has been put into these retrofits. So last I counted, I think that there was something like California put in $250 million, and then several hundred million additional dollars went into these retrofits or new vehicle purchases on the part of EPA. New Haven even benefited in receiving some of these newer buses.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We may have time for some more questions for you towards the end, but thank you, John. And we're going to now welcome our next speaker, Nancy Blackwood from Red Bank, New Jersey. Nancy is the chair of the Red Bank Environmental Commission and their Green Team. And she's a shining example of the many volunteers leading town green teams and sustainability committees across the country and really inspiring change from within their own communities. We have lots of those folks in Connecticut and in all the states involved in the Sustainable States Network. So so grateful for the work you're doing, Nancy, in representing that team of vibrant volunteers. Nancy received a grant, or Red Bank did, from Sustainable Jersey to do some interesting work on tactical urbanism, which she's going to share with us. So I will turn it over now to Nancy. Thank you.
Oh, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. What I'm going to do is share my screen now and discuss what we did with our Technical Assistance Award for 2 projects related to tactical urbanism. So just give me a second and I will get this screen shared. Okay, it's not working the way I want to, but enough to get by. So back in to give you a little bit of a background about Red Bank, it's a small town in central New Jersey in Monmouth County. It's 2.2 square miles. We have a population of about 12,150 people, lots of seniors, lots of under 18s. It's also a popular destination because we are a walking downtown. It's home to two very active theaters, the Count Basie and Two River Theaters. We have a thriving retail, restaurants, and general arts district. We also have parks that encourage people to come in, take a walk. Our town is also affectionately known as a giant food court because we have so many restaurants here. It's a racially and economically diverse community, so we have all ranges of income and people from all over the world, and we tend to be a very welcoming and inclusive community. So one of the challenges that we have, it is an older town, and with an older town, you have narrow streets. It is also a town that borders other towns, so therefore we get a lot of through traffic with people going towards the Jersey Shore or people going towards a train station. Our town has a train station, so we do have people coming in to commute into New York. Cycling is difficult because, again, the narrow streets, so it's not exactly safe for cyclists, but they do cycle. And pedestrians tend to be at risk during peak traffic hours. We have a diverse number of residents that do rely on cycling and walking around town, and that's particularly on our lower income west side of town. Again, we mentioned we have lots of restaurants, so you have a lot of them do work in the restaurant industry, so they're coming across town to work, and they're either walking or cycling. Red Bank is also encumbered by the fact that we also have state and county roads that run through the town, which limits what the town can actually do to improve its traffic flow. So again, I mentioned that we did get awarded a technical assistance grant, and it was for an intersection improvement and a public outreach plaza. Our team was a large team. It represented people from the North Jersey Transportation Planning Authority, the Voorhees Transportation Center at Rutgers, Sustainable Jersey. Our Red Bank Borough Administration was involved, which was our police, DPU, planning departments. We also had residential advocates that we'll call the Green Team and Environmental Commission, as well as general residents who are bicycle and pedestrian advocates. We also reached out to our business alliances, which is Red Bank River Center and the Business Alliance, to work with us on this project. So what had transpired is the team came together and we identified a few intersections, and then one day we took a walkabout around town to identify which intersection will be the focus of the demonstration project. So the project site we chose is Dr. James Parker Boulevard, which is an offset intersection, which when planners, I guess, were designing roads when the town was building up, the concept of the offset intersection was designed to slow traffic, but it has, in today's world, it's a different experience. We also have large trucks that are coming through town. This particular intersection has 3 pedestrian crosswalks there, and we have 2 community organizations, Lunch Break, which is a food bank, an education center, the Boys and Girls Club, and plus there are 2 day centers along the way. So there is no stoplight there. So what happens during peak traffic hours, vehicles and pedestrians find it difficult, with who goes first. So what I have here is an aerial of the intersection itself, as you can see here. So this is South Bridge Avenue, and the offset intersection is right here. So cars would come here, they would make a left and then continue down Bridge Avenue, or they'll go across. 1 block away at this intersection where my cursor is, that happens to be a county road, that's Shrewsbury Avenue. And on that intersection, you have a church, you have a coffee shop, and a park. So what the students at the VTC did is they came up with a design of how we can improve the intersection here. So this is a legend of what they had. So their suggestions were that we should add some bollards along here to improve visibility and also prevent illegal parking, which was a common issue. Put a design in the mural to create a positive distraction to the drivers, add bollards over here, and put some public art within the mural. So that's what we worked on. So here are the gentlemen from our DPU painting the intersection. Our team actually took the green mural literally and painted the whole intersection green and chose a very simple and effective mural, which was a sun, which you can see here. So here you see the lunch break on one side and the bollards are up showing here. And this next picture I have is showing how the bollards up allow for more visibility at the intersection itself. So after the design was up for a few weeks, we did some community feedback. There was an on-site survey, as well as we reached out to our local town blogs and newspapers and via a Google form to our borough. And we received a lot of community feedback. What they liked most were the bright colors, that it was attractive and functional. They like that it catches their attention, creating that positive distraction for drivers that we need. The pedestrians themselves did feel safer. And with the bollards, they did like that there was no illegal parking and a better view of the intersection. And why I put public cooperation here is that in the beginning, we were having some issues with the bollards being removed, but after a while, they knew to leave them in place. So the professional recommendations after we had the installation was in the form of a report prepared by NJTPA, VTC, and Sustainable Jersey. I have a link here to the full report. They recommended permanent bollards, put up some stop for pedestrian signs, or the rectangular rapid flash beacons over there, bicycle racks, particularly for by the Boys and Girls Club and the lunch break location. Design a permanent mural because that mural was temporary. And because we're an artistic town, we do have a lot of local artists and community groups that can help us. And also to restrict left turns from the northbound side of South Bridge Avenue. And that would actually be where you're going to navigate that offset intersection to continue going straight. They also recommend that we can do these designs at other locations through town. So here are the changes that we have for that particular intersection. The bollards are being installed. They're going to be steel bollards and they will be removable so that the DPU can plow when there's snow on the ground. Pedestrian crossing signs will be going up. We have some bicycle racks already, but there are going to be more. And a permanent mural is what we're working on. So we reached out to the Boys and Girls Club as they're right on the corner and they're kids. And they designed this mural for us and they call it Togetherness, which is what the Boys and Girls Club do. And the permanent mural will be installed in spring 2021. So the next part of the project was the pedestrian outreach plaza. And what we have here is a design that was done by the VTC. This was for White Street, which is one again of our streets that actually gets narrow going into our main downtown district. And what that, it was just a natural place to have the intersection because the parking lots for downtown are behind it and people can get out and about and walk. So this is their day view that they had and they created one with a night view. Unfortunately, to do the test, it required that the intersection remained closed for a period of a month. And our police and fire departments were not too happy about that because they use it as one of the emergency routes. So we had to put that project on hold. However, due to the pandemic in 2020, we had a lot of empty roads because everyone was home. And an outreach committee Red Bank Reopens committee was created to help businesses, to allow them the restaurants to be able to open up outside and to be able to facilitate encouraging people to still remain safe for COVID, but yet come into town. So it was open weekends through September with full street closure from September to November. what I'm going to launch right now and talk through is, instead of showing individual pictures, I'm going to just launch this video that was created by Critical Mass Media that really showcases Broad Street, and then talk through it. So as you can see, it covers most of the downtown district over here. Now this tends to be on the east side of town. We also have another part of town called the west side. And over there, because it's on a county road, we were not able to do any street closures, but what the town did is allow no fee permits for outdoor seating and creating individual streeteries for business. So that's one of the things that they did. They also would put up bollards, they strung lights across, to help the businesses and to create a more attractive area. What happened in the downtown street closures is for businesses that were not located right in the area of closes, they were allowed at no fee to create pop-up stores so they could showcase their merchandise and sell their goods. This entertainment was also provided here at no charge. We have musicians, we had hula hoop dancers, and it really made a significant difference to the town. People enjoyed walking it. In the mornings, the kids actually would come out on their bicycles and cycle down the Broad Walk because it was empty and very safe for them to do. So this is part of what is the success of Broad Walk. Businesses reported that they had a tremendous amount of business. They've had their best years ever, and people loved it so much. So that next year, we're looking to do this again. And this time, it's going to be more permanent. With a grant that the town received for Broad Street, they're going to install retractable bollards that can come up and down as needed. And they're also working on some street changes to make it fully accessible to all on this side of town. So this is basically what I have, and thank you. I'd also like to give special thanks to all the people who made this happen for our town. That would be Sustainable Jersey, NJTPA, the Borough, VTC, the Police Department, and Critical Mass Creative. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Nancy. Wow. I love taking back the streets for the pedestrians and the local economies. It's a great, inspiring story. So questions in the Q&A. I see one question: how much money was awarded through the technical assistance grant for the first project you talked about?
It was $10,000.
Okay, great. And yeah, I think, is busking a part of your downtown plan?
Sorry, busking?
Busking. So Cyril, you can type in what you mean by that, but I think it's musicians who play and put a hat out, if I have that right.
If that is what it means, then yes, it's definitely part of our plan.
Okay, great. Yeah, seems like we got it. So that they're allowed. Do they need a permit or anything like that, or?
There were no permit fees due to the pandemics. So everyone just pitched together to get the town open.
Great. Yeah, I think this is did residents complain about access to open streets and parking at all?
Funny enough, Red Bank always is known for having a parking issue. And what that really translated to after a parking study was done was that people don't know where to park, but there is ample parking. When Broad Street was closed, it didn't really become an issue. Some residents who live directly off Broad Street did have some complaints because, again, we have narrow streets, and one of the streets has its one way on one side and the other way it goes into the other direction. So there were some issues about that, and the town addressed it.
Excellent. All right, Nancy, we may have some more questions at the end, but we're going to move on to our final speaker today, whose name is Kristen Wilson from the city of Kingston, New York. Kristen is director of the Office of Grants Management for Kingston, and she has spearheaded lots of projects on complete streets, rail trails, linear parks, and Kingston's Green Line. So I will hand it over to you, Kristen.
Okay. Let me just get this started. And
Looks great.
okay, can everybody see my first slide now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, great. Hi, my name is Kristen Wilson. I'm the Director of Grants Management for the City of Kingston. And we are a small city that's 90 miles north of New York City on the Hudson River. Our population is about 23 to 24,000, and I think growing, especially since the beginning of the pandemic. And we have a lot of people moving here from New York City and other areas. Our population is about 70% white, 15% African American, 15% Hispanic or Latino, and we also have other Asian and smaller percentages of Native American and biracial or multiracial people. And our city also has a relatively high poverty rate. We have about 20% of our residents are living in poverty, and 26% of our children are living in poverty. So we have, it's a very interesting city. We have a lot of multiracial and neighborhoods that are characterized by different people from different economic backgrounds all sort of living together. We don't have people separated as you might find in other cities. So it's a very interesting place. And I've been working here since 2007. And we have a strong group of people working on complete streets and now what we call the Kingston Green Line, which is a system of complete streets, linear parks, and trails that we have been building to connect our neighborhoods of Kingston, and specifically to connect people from their neighborhoods to important places like the grocery store, or the hospital, or parks. And create more access, especially for people without cars. So I'll share a little bit about our Green Line. Our Kingston Green Line idea for it was conceived by the Kingston Land Trust back in about 2010. I think they were discussing it before. But they launched the rail trail project in 2010, specifically to address underutilized rail corridors in the city. So these rail corridors were had lots of trash and overgrown and just were not being utilized. Around the same time, our Common Council adopted a complete streets policy and created a complete streets advisory council. And that was really focused on creating streets that are accessible to all different travelers and users, and utilizing new ways of designing the streets so that they're not so car focused and more focused on pedestrians, bicycles, and transit users. And then in about 2011, the Kingston Land Trust commissioned the Kingston Point Rail Trail feasibility study. So Kingston Point Rail Trail is it's about 1 mile trail it was an underutilized corridor, and they commissioned that study to see if it would be possible to actually create a rail trail out of it. And they found that it would be a great place to put in a trail And then in 2013, our city began submitting grant applications for design and construction funding to state agencies, and received funding for that. And that was sort of the Kingston Point Rail Trail was sort of the kickoff of the whole Kingston Green Line. And then in 2014, we developed the conceptual plan to develop the whole system. So I'll share that with a little about that with you. So our conceptual plan envisioned a green line that would connect all of the neighborhoods. And so can people see my cursor moving? Yes, okay, excellent. So this little loop here is the Kingston Point Rail Trail, and that was the first trail that was built. And this is where it all sort of started. And then we thought about, well, okay, how can we connect our rail trail to other places in Kingston and to other rail trails? So we developed the Broadway Streetscape project. There's another streetscape project that connects to the Wallkill Valley Rail Trail. And we wanted to connect around on the Hudson Riverfront. And so these are kind of the beginnings of connecting this rail trail to other places in the city. We also have a Midtown Linear Park that is actually part of the same rail system that connected to the Kingston Point Rail Trail. And right here, this is where we have a commercial center, where we have our Hannaford, which is the only grocery store in our city. And so this is sort of the idea that we started with, and we have been slowly connecting them. So for each area that you see here, yellow it's still under planning or design phase. And then light green is it's in the build phase right now. So that means it's being built. And green, dark green is it's open. So, and as we were going along in our journey to create this Kingston Green Line, the governor at the same time was developing this idea for the Empire State Trail. And I think because we had made so many advancements in Kingston, they jogged the Empire State Trail over the, well, and also for New Paltz and some of the other areas, that they jogged the trail over the Hudson River and brought it through Kingston, and then they jogged it back over the Hudson River. So we're really excited about that. The Empire State Trail is essentially what I would think of as the New York State Thruway for bicyclists and pedestrians. So we they began planning in 2017 for the Empire State Trail, and we were included. And having the Empire State Trail come through Kingston helped the city to be able to leverage more funding for local projects. So when we were writing grant applications for design and construction of our projects to state agencies, we would say it's on the Empire State Trail, and I think it made us a little bit more competitive for funding. And also the New York State DOT actually built some sections in Kingston. So I'm just going to move on and share a little bit about some of our projects. The Broadway Streetscape project is one that is on the main corridor of our city. And it will be one of the first two-way protected bike lanes in upstate New York that will be installed. So we've been working on the design for this since 2015. And it started with planning through our MPO, which is our Ulster County Transportation Council. And then the city took over with design. And this project originally, I think, began as a $3 million project, and then it expanded to a $9 million project because we were able to secure more funding from the state for it. And we added bioswales, which is green infrastructure that helps to move water through the groundwater instead of through our storm system. So essentially, it's avoiding dirty water going into the river. And it's been a very exciting project. It's currently under construction. And and the sidewalks on at least one side of the road have already been built, and we plan that it'll be done in the summer of 2021. Here's another example of a small project that we did. It was just a short stretch of sidewalk that we replaced in Kingston. And the reason I included this in the presentation is it shows kind of like what we're dealing with in Kingston. These are bluestone sidewalks here, and they're historical. However, they're definitely not ADA accessible. So that's a whole nother story that I won't share today, but it's definitely a challenge to figure out how to replace these sidewalks and respect the history of Kingston, but also create accessibility for people with disabilities. And in this case, we chose to go with a concrete sidewalk. Here is another park that it actually isn't a park, it's more of a sidewalk, but we've been calling it a parklet just because it's a small little park. Although my understanding is that parklets are actually places in parking lots or in parking spaces alongside the road where you sort of take over the parking spot and create it into a little community space. But we're calling this one a parklet. And so this was actually funded through the Hudson River Valley Greenway, but we combined it with some community development block grant funding to essentially restore this area. Above, down here is our Kingston Point Rail Trail. So this is the area that's around, and eventually we'll have a stairway that will come from the park down into the rail trail. But you can see the difference, just a major upgrade, removing the trash, making ADA accessible sidewalks. And we created this space that we're continuing to work on the landscape design of that. And then here's our Kingston Point Rail Trail, which I spoke about earlier. So this is our before picture. You can imagine this was not a very enticing place to go. And now we've, in 2019, built an ADA compliant 10-foot wide trail that travels for a mile through the city. Here's another picture before and after of our Kingston Point Rail Trail. And then in other places, we don't always have the option to install sidewalks or bicycle trails yet, because those projects are very expensive. So we have been utilizing share arrows, which is it's essentially a shared arrow that indicates that bicyclists and cars can share the road. And so we've done things like that. And as you know, we did this as sort of a short-term measure, but in the long term, we are looking at the planning of this entire area along our waterfront and how we might redesign those streets. So we're also looking at how to redesign a walkway that's along the river. We're working with a company now to develop a climate resilient boardwalk. So it would be a boardwalk that would raise up and down with as the Hudson River rises with climate change. We anticipate that this boardwalk would have to be risen. And then this is another picture of the Hudson River Brickyard Trail, which is on the northern part of our Kingston Green Line. And this is part of the Empire State Trail. This land was, previously, until it opened on January 1st of this year, was previously completely not accessible to our community. And so this trail it's a transportation corridor, but it's also goes through a park. And so it's creating access to nature for our community as well. So I listed some of the challenges along the way. I think I may be running out of time, but we have a lot of, there's been a lot of lessons learned. And I think the biggest one that we've learned is that our projects all move very forward very quickly, especially since the Empire State Trail came to Kingston, and it's all been very, very exciting. However, the capacity of our city staff and our Kingston Land Trust staff have, they've been very challenged to keep up with the pace of our projects. And so as a result, I think sometimes we are very challenged by keeping up with community outreach and keeping up with communicating to the community about these projects and getting feedback from the community in an equitable way. And so those are some of the highlights of some of the challenges. Right now, also, we are experiencing some bike lash, or what I would call bike lash, in our community, where as these trails and bike paths are getting built, there are a lot of people who may have not been involved in the planning or design process are now voicing their opinions that they are not pleased with all of the investment in the bicycle infrastructure. And also we're having problems with housing affordability and gentrification in Kingston. And we're starting to have some difficult conversations around, do these upgrades of infrastructure lead to gentrification or exacerbate it? And so those are some of the challenges that are presented by doing this work. I just listed here our city team just to show that we have a lot of different players. This is just in the city. We also have a lot of partners at the Kingston Land Trust and Ulster County, and also with Scenic Hudson. But I just wanted to show that when you start implementing projects like this, you can plan to involve all the lawyers and the finance people. It gets very complicated very quickly. So that's all I have to share for today. Happy to entertain some questions.
Thank you so much, Kristen. All right, we'll invite you all to put your questions in the Q&A again, and we can focus some on Kristen and her presentation, and John and Nancy as well. As we wrap up, we've got about 7 minutes. I'm curious, your last point, Kristen, mentioning about as you make cities better places to live, the threat of gentrification. And I'm curious, Nancy, if you have experienced any of that. I think curious, or any of the backlash as you kind of improve infrastructure.
Yes, we have. And one thing that our council, as well as other members of the community, have made very clear that we're not opposed to gentrification, but we don't want displacement. So whenever new developments, or whenever a developer comes with a project for town, we do ask those questions to see, are you being accessible for all, affordable for all, and all the other good things that go with that. Yes.
Thank you. All right, we've got some questions coming in for Kristen, I guess. Can you provide some examples of the bike lash, Kristen?
Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on. I see that I'm not sure what's going on with my light, but some examples are, well, if you visit the City of Kingston's Facebook page and you find any of our posts about new infrastructure, you will find a lot of comments about why is the city investing in this infrastructure instead of paving the roads, or why did the city build a trail instead of fix all of the sidewalks? So or people who just are opposed to, bicyclists shouldn't be on the road at all. So, some of it I think is, related to some of the divisions we're experiencing in our country in general. And some of it I think is related to the city hasn't, had the opportunity to educate all of our citizens or to get agreement about how to move forward with the best infrastructure for everybody. And I think that some of it is it's definitely very challenging for people when we're talking about public space, specifically the space on the streets. There's a competition between essentially parking, trees, and vehicle lanes and bicycles. And there just isn't enough space on our streets, at least, for all of those things. And so it's a constant conversation and a constant balance about what is most important. And I don't think we have agreement among all of our community members about what's most important. And so that's really the challenge of our leaders, is just to make choices and drive forward. And
Yeah, so speaking to those competing uses, I'm curious, having heard John's presentation at the beginning and the school bus emissions, if any of you, John, Nancy, or Kristen, have seen these bikeways and pedestrian pathways actually kind of formally used to get students to school in a cleaner way at all.
Well, some of our, the Kingston Point Rail Trail connects to a school, an elementary school, and it specifically connects a lower income housing complex to the school. So I have seen children utilizing it to get to school that way. They were already walkers. It's just made the walking experience more enjoyable.
Right.
Also, I'm sorry, go ahead, Nancy. If you look in warmer parts of the country, you'll see that many college campuses are set up with satellite parking lots and bike trails that lead back into campuses. They're a terrific model, and many European cities are also set up like that.
Excellent, thanks, Nancy.
Yes, I was going to mention that in Red Bank, because we're a small town, busing is basically limited. So it's not unusual to see, with the younger kids in particular, called walking school buses. So they tend to walk together in groups, or a few people that I know actually do cycle with their kids to school as well when it's feasible. So, we do that. And I mean, there is some busing, and, I do worry about the emissions as well, and the danger to the children in that, but it's very limited.
Thank you. So we are at time to wrap up. I just want to take the last moment to thank our three panelists. Thank you so much. Great conversation. Lots of inspiration and food for thought. There's some remaining questions in the chat. We'll try to get back to those folks. Please join us next week for the fourth webinar in our series called Reinventing Green Spaces, where we will feature case studies from Meriden, Connecticut, and Jersey City, New Jersey. Same time, Tuesday at noon, and you can register on Yale's website or Sustainable CT. Thank you all, and have a fabulous, safe, walkable, rideable afternoon. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.